Welcome to the Evergreen Thumb, your go-to podcast for up-to-date research-based horticulture and environmental stewardship knowledge to help you grow and manage your garden. Produced by Washington State University Extension Master Gardener volunteers and brought to you by the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State. I'm your host, Erin Hoover, a WSU Extension Master Gardener since 2015 and a certified permaculture designer and modern homesteader. WSU Master Gardener volunteers are university-trained community educators who have been cultivating plants, people, and communities since 1973. Are you ready to grow? Let's dig into today's episode. Welcome to episode 31 of the Evergreen Thumb. My guest today is Kamori Cattadoris, and she is a WSU Extension Master Gardener in Pend Oreille County, Washington. And she's here to talk to us about seed saving, particularly in the vegetable garden. But before she joins us, I would like to go through the October gardening calendar. I can't believe it's October already. There's a lot of things going on in the garden this time of year. For planning, if needed, improve your soil drainage of lawns before rains begin. Hopefully you kept track of what those wet areas were from last winter, and you can work on those now before the rain starts again. For maintenance, you want to winterize bird baths and garden art to avoid chipping and cracking from freezing. And be sure to recycle disease-free plant material and kitchen vegetables and fruit scraps into your compost. If you have been pruning and have anything that's diseased, either put it in a yard waste bin or even put it in the garbage. Don't put it in your compost unless you are sure it is going to get hot enough to kill the diseases. It's time to drain or blow out your irrigation system and insulate the valve mechanisms to prepare for winter. Use newspaper or cardboard covered by mulch to discourage winter and spring annual weeds or remove a lawn area for conversion to garden beds. It's time to maintain and clean your greenhouses and cold frames for plant storage and winter growth. Harvest those sunflowers. The seeds can be bird feed or they can be roasted for personal use. Our chickens love sunflower seeds. We'll just put a whole head in there and they'll clean it up in minutes. It's also time to dig and store potatoes. Some early varieties may have already been done, but you want to be sure to keep your potatoes in darkness and in a moderate humidity. Discard unused potatoes if they sprout, and don't use those as seed potatoes for the next year. Filberts and walnuts should be coming ready. Harvest them and immediately dry them at 95 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Unfortunately, the scrub jays have already stolen all of our filberts for this year, so we're out of luck. But anyway, tomatoes. If there's a threat of frost, you can pick any tomatoes that have just gotten a little blush on them and bring them in, and they will continue to ripen. And make sure that you are checking the fruit often so that you can discard any rotting fruit. And it's apple season. Store apples at 40 degrees Fahrenheit with a moderate humidity. Similar to potatoes, be sure to keep apples and potatoes stored in somewhat different locations and not right next to each other. Mulch root zones of roses, azaleas, rhododendrons, and berries to protect them for the winter. Stake or trim bushy herbaceous perennials so that they don't get damaged by fall and winter winds. Make sure you clean up annual flower beds by removing diseased plant materials and mulch with manure or compost to feed the soil. Cover asparagus and rhubarb beds with a mulch of manure or compost. Prune out dead fruiting canes in raspberries. Western Washington, it's time to harvest winter squash and pumpkins. Keep them in a dry area at about 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So one way to do this, assuming your squash are not too big, is you can actually, if you put them on a higher shelf, say above your potatoes or your apples, since they need a little bit warmer temperature, of course, most of us know heat rises. So if you put them on a higher shelf, the temperature is going to be warmer. After your first light frost, dig up and divide summer bulbs like dahlias, gladiolas, and lilies. For planting and propagation, it's time to dig and divide rhubarb, and rhubarb should be divided about every 4 years. It's also time to plant garlic. I usually plant right about the 1st of October, and then if you mulch it with straw or grass clippings or something, as long as it's not too deep, it really helps suppress the weeds around the garlic. It's time to save seeds from your vegetable and your flower garden. Make sure that they are thoroughly dry. Kamori goes through all of this in today's episodes. Make sure you label and date your seeds. You can plant and divide trees, shrubs, and ground covers. This is actually a very good time of year to plant trees and shrubs. It gives them time to get established before winter comes, but also then they are more resilient when it comes to drought stress the following year. Let's see, for pest monitoring and management, be sure to dispose of windfall apples as they may be harboring apple maggots or codling moth larvae. And then this helps or interrupts the life cycle of those larvae to reduce infestations in future years. Also, rake and destroy diseased leaves from those fruit trees like apple, cherry, roses. Or again, hot compost them if you're sure your compost gets hot enough to kill those diseases. Spray apple and stone fruit trees at leaf fall to prevent various fungal and bacterial diseases. So this would be your copper spray for peaches, things like that. For indoor plants, if you set your plants outdoor for the summer, they should be in by now. And if you have problems with low humidity inside, group indoor plants together, and that will collectively help to raise the humidity for all of them. It's time to begin to reduce water and place Christmas cacti in a cool area and increase the amount of darkness or shade that they receive in order to force them to blooming in time for late December. Make sure to move your fuchsias to a spot where they won't freeze, but don't cut them back until spring. And if you are just bringing in your house plants from being outside for the summer, make sure that you treat them for any disease that you see or any insects before bringing those indoors. You really don't want those indoors, and you don't want to spread to the rest of your house plants as well. So that pretty much covers the October gardening calendar. Let's move on to my conversation with Kamori. Kamori Cattadoris and her husband Bob have lived on 8.75 acres in Northeast Washington for 13 years. She began gardening organically by following Steve Solomon's book, Growing Vegetables West of the Cascades. Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway describes how to apply permaculture principles to city gardens and prompted her to take a permaculture design course, which informed the design of their current homestead. Carol Deppy's Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties inspired her to take seed saving to the next step. Now, a WSU Extension Master Gardener, she loves sharing her knowledge and experience with others. Kamori, thanks for joining me today. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
So to start off, maybe you can tell us a little about yourself and what you do, what your favorite thing to do as a master gardener.
Oh, as a master gardener. Well, I'm in charge of delivering education to our community. So I set up all of the classes and find speakers and confirm our venue and all that kind of fun stuff. And I also do about half of the presentations because that's really the reason I joined Master Gardeners, was I wanted to share my passion for gardening. And I've been gardening basically, 40 years, 50 years, something like that. And it started out with a postage stamp garden, and now I'm working on 8.75 acres, of which about 2 acres is cultivated in gardens and orchards. So it's my full-time job now that I'm so-called retired. So yeah, so I'm sharing my passion.
Today we're talking about seed saving. And so what are some of the benefits of saving seeds from your own garden?
Well, number one, money. Basically, my goal now, not where I started gardening, but where it is now, is I want to try to raise as much of our produce year-round as possible. And so seeds are expensive. And so seed saving is by far the best way to go for the things that are easy and possible to save seed from. depending on your situation and your growing conditions.
So when it comes to seed saving, what is the difference between heirloom, open pollinate, and hybrid seeds, and how does that affect the quality of your seeds?
Yes, those are very important considerations. So heirloom are varieties that have been passed down from generation to generation. For example, I just got some Slagle family bean seeds this year from the Slagle family. They are not gardening anymore, and they wanted somebody who loves to garden to use them. And so I gladly did that to keep that variety going. It's unique. I've never seen anything like them. Open pollinated, of which heirloom are a subcategory, are simply seeds that are not they're bred to be the parents and the child offspring of the plants are the same, or roughly the same characteristics that you're expecting. Whereas a hybrid is a cross, a recent cross between two other purebreds or more sometimes. And when you have a cross, the first generation comes out all nice and uniform and vigorous, good growers. But after that, you get all kinds of surprising results from your saved seed, which is either a positive or a negative, depending on your goal. So my goal sometimes is I just want to see what happens when I go ahead and save seed and plant the second generation. And oftentimes, yeah, some of the plants won't look like or have the same characteristics as the parents, but some of them will. And then I'll just save seed from that one. And then the next year, the same thing. I'll just pick out the ones that are most similar to the characteristics I wanted. 5 or 6 years later, I've got a stable variety that is very similar to that hybrid. Now, not all hybrids can be saved seed, though. Sometimes they're sterile. So it really depends on what the breeder did to get the hybrid variety that you've got. But by and large, like with the kales and broccolis and really common plants like that, most of the time those are just simple cross breeding and they haven't done tissue horticulture or back crossing or all kinds of fancy stuff. So you can usually get a decent result, even saving hybrid seeds, as long as you don't mind the variety and surprises.
So when it comes to cross-pollination and seed saving, what are some things that you need to be aware of?
Well, there are some varieties such as tomatoes, beans, lettuce, and peas, which are self-pollinating, and they don't cross as readily. They will cross, but not as readily. So you can oftentimes have good luck saving seeds from those plants without worrying about having it cross with some other variety that you don't want it to. On the other hand, just about everything else does cross breed. And so then it just depends on whether you care. So, for example, I grew a whole bunch of kales all together and I saved seed anyway, and I don't care. I don't mind the variety of different types of kale. And then on the other hand, I didn't want my radishes to cross because there's quite a bit of difference between a storage radish and one that you just, crisp up and use for a garden salad. So in order to keep those from crossing, basically I only save one variety of radish seed per season. And it's a really great benefit that radish seeds actually last a really long time. I've had some last as long as 9 or 10 years and are still viable and produce healthy, vigorous plants. So that means that if I have 10 varieties of radishes, I just do one, a different one a year, and I will be able to save seed from those. Of course, you got to keep track of which ones you did and whatnot, but that's all part of the fun. And I do keep notes. I do keep a journal, so I know exactly what I've done from year to year. I didn't start out that way, but boy, now I do.
So what about like with squashes? I've heard that there can be it's called a toxic squash syndrome, that where if certain varieties cross-pollinate, they can be bitter.
That I'm not familiar with, so I really can't respond to that. But what I do with my squashes is, first of all, I always start with, a variety that I purchased. And I only, again, save seed from one at a time. So I'm lucky in that I have a really large property. And so in the front of my property, I plant my single variety of squash that I want to save seed from for this year. And they are just far enough away that I'm pretty sure I won't get a cross-pollination. So the rest of my squash then is in the back of our property. Now, remember, we have 8.75 acres. And it's a long, skinny property. So I can actually get quite a ways back to plant my squash away from the one I'm trying to save seed from. The other thing that you can do, and I do as well, is there's 3 different species of squashes, winter squashes especially, And if you plant all those together at the same time, they won't cross because they are different species. And so that's a really nice strategy to keep in mind. So there's some really good winter squashes besides pumpkin, which crosses with everything, that you can say right alongside of your pumpkin, and they won't cross. But if you want to save seed from pumpkin, then yeah, I have to do the whole isolation routine that I just described, because it will readily cross with zucchini and anything else that's in that same family.
So that's where it gets important to know what the Latin name of your species is if you're going to do that.
And luckily, nearly all, I have only had one sample, one seed vendor that doesn't, but nearly all of them will put the species name right on the packet. You just usually ignore it, right? Because you just want to know if it's dark star zucchini. So so start getting familiar with the 3 different species, and that will, one of them is moschata. I can't remember the other one. And then upepo is the more common one. So, but anyway, you'll notice they are different families. And so that's the main thing to watch out for.
Okay. So what are some common mistakes gardeners make when attempting to save seeds?
It's every single species is different. And so what I did was I got a book to help me with all this. So most of the mistakes that I've made are mostly in the process of storing the seeds. That's really the most critical part, because but harvesting has also got its tricks. For example, kale and broccoli and cabbages, they all produce little pods, and those pods will shatter. And your seed is all over the garden instead of in your nice little envelope waiting for next year. So the trick with them is to harvest them when they're mature, but not totally dried out. And then put them in a bag, put the little pods in a bag and let them finish drying out in that bag. And then all you got to do is stomp on them and the seeds fall at the bottom. But then that storage is the other big thing, because I use plastic bags because I'm trying to keep my seeds as long as possible. And I've got really thick milliliter plastic for that purpose. Now, those are great because they keep the moisture out. But if you have put moisture in, it also keeps the moisture in. And yes, I've had moldy seeds. And so basically drying them out sufficiently is really, really critical. So those really are the biggest problems, is losing your seed before you ever collect it, and then losing it via mold. Oh, but I should mention bugs, because that's another thing, is bugs can attack and eat your seeds before you've collected them. That has happened to me, and I didn't notice that was happening. And I stored some peas one time, and there were little bugs in the center of each pea, had eaten up the center. And so they were no good anymore. So that was a big surprise. So yeah, you do have to watch out for bugs. And oh, by the way, freezing did not kill those little bugs. They just woke right up and kept right on eating.
All right. So you mentioned about broccoli or brassicas and their seeds. What are some other ways to tell the seed is mature and ready to be harvested?
Well, with those, it's easy. The pods they're bright green and soft when they're young. They're a duller green when they're just about ready to pick, when I pick them, because I don't want them to be brown and dry. So they want to have a little tiny bit of moisture still in them, and the color has faded to very near that light brown color that pods will get. And that whole family, the whole brassica family, is like that. So that's what's nice. There's most of my garden is brassicas, so it makes it really easy for seed saving, except for the pollination crossing problem. That does make it tricky. So again, I'll only save from one variety or one species at a time, because otherwise they'll cross.
What about some seeds other than brassicas?
Well, then you've got problems like tomatoes, which basically those are a fruit, not a pod. So fruit seeds, and that would also include tomatillos and probably others, cucumbers, things like that. Those are actually, botanically speaking, a fruit. Those, you just make sure that the fruit itself is ripe, good and ripe. Maybe even a little overripe, like you wouldn't want to eat it, but it's not rotten yet. You don't want to let it get to the point where it starts to rot, obviously, because then it'll eventually get to your seeds, although they're surprisingly resilient. They can actually last, they're like the last to go. The fruit will rot first. On the other hand, with tomatoes, if you want to get rid of the little gelatin coat around each tomato seed, some gardeners do, some don't. it does cause the seed to remain dormant until that gel coating is removed in one way or another. Now, nature does it through fermentation, and so the gardener can do it too. So you actually induce fermentation around those seeds in order to break down that gel coating. And then you need to wash them and dry them, and dry them because they'll be quite wet. So those are quite different. What else? Cucumbers are a lot like that. They come from a wet fruit, so you just need to extract them and let them dry really well. But they don't have that gelatinous coating that tomato seeds do. Squashes are really straightforward. They've got a hull, and so they're easy to pull out. And beans also are pods, so it's the same thing there. You don't want your pods to shatter in the field, especially if you try growing legumes like chickpeas, which are really delicious and easy to grow. But they shatter really easily and sometimes prematurely. And I've had such bad luck with them that I just stopped growing them. So
what is the best way to collect seeds without damaging them?
I've never really had a problem with damaging seeds unless it's leaving them in the sunlight. That will dry them out and age them prematurely. So you want to keep them out of light. I mean, they're amazingly resilient. For example, when I'm harvesting beans from their pods, I just line a huge tub and stomp on them. You would think that would hurt the seeds, but it doesn't. It just cracks open the pods, and then I can pull off the pods from the top, and the seeds are on the bottom, and they're all fine. They don't even split. Now, maybe it's different from bean to bean, but the ones that I've been using, and I have like 20 different varieties of beans, I've never had that problem.
So what are some of the best methods for storing to maintain their viability? I know you mentioned the plastic bags.
Right. But those are, again, trickier to work with because you really have to make sure the seeds are dry. So, for example, behind me, I have open containers full of all these different types of seeds that I'm collecting right now because it's the season. And I just let them sit there on my working space, open, totally open with nice flat bottoms so that the seeds aren't piling on top of each other. And I might not bag them up until January because I just want to make sure they're dry. But there are tests that you can do. If you've got a nice cutting board and a hammer, you can take them and make sure they shatter. If you hammer on them and they just kind of flatten and you see any juice, or, I mean, obviously they're not dry enough, but they should literally shatter, just like broken glass type of thing. So that would be a good test. I have used that test on occasion when I wasn't sure about peas because they can take a remarkably long time to dry down. So, because they're big.
So I know you've said some seeds you've been able to keep as long as 10 years. What would you say is an average for viability?
Well, an average would be 2 to 3 years, but it's really by variety. So, for example, I have the parsley seeds and celery seeds. They're both from the same family, and carrot seeds. Those last, gosh, a decade or more. Just even if they're just in paper envelopes. I mean, they're just amazing. They have a really long shelf life. On the other hand, onions are on the other side of the extreme. They may not last more than 1 year, sometimes 2. 3, you're really stretching it, and you might only get like 25% germination. And so I pretty much buy my onion seeds every year. Now, I have trouble saving onion seeds because that's something we haven't mentioned yet, but they are biennials. And so they don't produce seed until the second year. Now, I live in Northeast Washington, which is cold. So not everything makes it over the winter here. And of course, I have underground critters like pocket gophers that will munch on the plants, and voles and moles that will dig tunnels through the snow and munch on the plants. And so it's really hard for me to save biennial seeds. Although sometimes it happens and I happily save them. So I do end up having to purchase seeds. But onions is our one thing that really just don't save very long. That would include scallions and chives, all that whole allium family of plants there.
So what are some methods of testing the viability before planting?
Well, I don't bother, but there are methods. The simplest one is simply to moisten a paper towel and spread a set number of seeds, like 10, that you can easily get yourself calculate a percentage from. So out of your 10 seeds, after 3 days to 2 weeks, it depends on what you're germinating, of course, because the germination time varies. But no less than 3 days usually, and no more than a couple of weeks on average. And then you just count how many germinated, and you can very easily see what the percentage is. And probably the rest of your seed collection is about that same percentage. And that's probably the easiest and safest way to test that if you really want to know. But what I do is with each year that my seeds grow or age, I should say, I will plant. Well, when they're fresh, I plant one to a cell. When they're 2 years old, I'll plant two seeds to a cell. When they're 3 years old, I'll plant three seeds to the cell. And after that, I will just have a big open flat, and I will plant the seeds in a long line in a big mass, and probably only 25% will grow. But hey, I got 25% out of it, so it's just different every year.
What are the easiest crops to save seeds from?
Well, that would be your self-pollinating plants. And out of those, the ones that suffer the least from any kind of inbreeding depression would be your tomatoes, beans, lettuce, and peas, those four. They're great starter crops for working on. And after that, you have some of your cross-pollinating crops that we've already mentioned, any of the brassicas, and that includes radishes, by the way, which are a brassica as well. Summer squashes and cucumbers. Now, those, though, you again have to isolate if you want to keep them from cross-pollinating. But otherwise, they're very non-susceptible to inbreeding depression, which means that for the crossbreeders especially. Now, let's take corn. That one is pollinated by wind, but they are well known for suffering what's known as inbreeding depression, meaning that if you save seed from too small a number of plants, they will not be viable and they will most likely be sterile, even if they do produce a plant. And I have validated that. I was told that 250 plants would be a good minimum. So that's what I tried, and I saved seed from all of those 250 plants and mixed them all up and then tried growing them the next season. They were sterile. They grew. I mean, there were plants, so I got halfway there, but they did not produce any corn. So I don't have room to grow 500 plants, which is what Carol Duppy, who is a well-known Oregon plant breeder, that's what she recommends, is a minimum of 500 plants. Well, I don't have room for that. That would be my whole garden. So, or not, it would be half my garden to be exact. So I don't save seed from corn. That's one of the things I have to purchase. So there are some, that's a really good example of one that I would not recommend ever trying to save unless you've got quarter of an acre that you can devote to corn.
So are there certain seeds that should be stored differently than others that are, like some outliers?
There probably are. Like if you're saving, I'm talking about mostly vegetable seeds, but you can save seeds from perennials, but some of them, like ones that produce berries, it's often better to just dry the whole berry. And I would do that in a typical dehydrator that you might have on hand for herbs or whatever, just to make sure they don't mold. So those need to be dried down, but not so that they're crispy, but so that they're just pliable. I guess that's the word. And that's the perfect stage. And then you can break them open in the spring and separate out the seeds, or just plant the whole berry, and you'll get a whole bunch of plants all close together. But most of the time, you can separate them out if you're really careful after they have achieved, say, the first set of true leaves. So that would be the exception, I think, is perennials. But, mostly with vegetables, you don't have to be concerned with that. They're all pretty similar once you've got them off the plant, once you've got them in your bag. Otherwise, each variety is totally different.
So for you, what's the most enjoyable part of saving seeds?
Well, I can express it this way. I did a garden tour recently of my garden, and some very seasoned gardeners were among them. And they walked over to a part of my garden and they went, "Ooh, what are those flowers?" Well, they were carrots on the second year that had somehow made it through the winter. And I was really surprised but if you just harvest your carrots every year, you wouldn't know. And so I think that is the biggest joy for me, is just seeing what the plant is really like. When they produce seed, they produce flowers and pods, and they grow huge, especially like lettuces. They start out as little rosettes on the ground, but they'll put out enormous spikes. And it's just a joy to watch the plant just become all it can be.
Yeah, I actually have lettuce in the garden that's 3 feet tall right now.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it amazing how big they get? I know.
They do. Every year I just let lettuce self-sow, and I have a never-ending supply of lettuce.
Exactly. I do the same. I love my volunteers. They always do better than anything I plant.
They do. My dill, however, is taking over.
Yeah. I had to cut back on dill also.
So how big of a leap is it to go from saving seeds to breeding your own plant varieties?
Well, interestingly enough, if you are saving seeds, you are already a plant breeder, because the number one and foundational technique to plant breeding is selecting and saving seeds. So even if you just kind of haphazardly select your seeds for saving, you have selected some and not selected others. Um, or if you got only a small number of plants, that's also a way of selecting, because you've limited the number of genetic variety that's going to be in your resulting seed mix. So you're already a plant breeder. So why not learn a little bit more, right? Well, so I purchased Carol Duppy's infamous book. She's informed a whole lot of wannabe amateur plant breeders, and that book is called Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties: The Gardener's and Farmer's Guide to Plant Breeding and Seed Saving. So it also includes seed saving, so you can get both disciplines in one, right? So she gives you a horticultural class in one book, right? Or a course, I should say, an entire course. And it seems kind of overwhelming when you read all that information, but it's so interesting. It's so interesting to find out about, all the different types of plants and inbreeding and outbreeding and this and that, and all the genetic different combinations and how the professional breeders do it. But since you are already a plant breeder, really you just need to know more fine nuances of plant selection. For example, how to rogue, how to choose which plants to keep. The Native Americans, for example, will recommend not keeping only your best plants, keep your second best ones too, because you want the genetic variety, especially for organic gardeners. Now, if you're not organic, don't worry about it. But we have challenging growing conditions in comparison to, spraying everything. So we want seeds that are resilient. And also the weather and climate are different from year to year. So we want things that some plants will do better in one year and some plants will do better in the other year. And if you have selected too finely, I guess, granularly, then your plants that you selected may not work so well in a different weather condition or a different year, basically. So those kinds of things were really valuable for me to learn. It really improved my seed saving. And there's lots of tips about how to rogue and when to rogue. If you're going to be saving seeds for a plant breeding project, then you've got to be extra careful about diseases, unless you want to breed something that is more disease resilient. And so then she tells you how to set up a situation so that you actually want to encourage powdery mildew, let's say, and then you choose the plant that did the best. And then next year you'll plant just the seeds from that one plant, or maybe it's two or three that did well. But again, put them in a situation where the mildew just goes to town, which it will. If you water the leaves, for example, and do that frequently enough, mildew will eventually find it. So, or if it rains a lot, this year in Northeast Washington, we got far more showers than usual. And so we're getting far more powdery mildew than usual also. So yeah, getting disease resistance is a very big consideration. And she shows you how you want to select for that. But what I found was another book that is a little short, skinny, spiral bound, lots of charts and graphs and bullet points. And that was far easier to use practically than Carol's wonderful book for background, although I still remember a lot of her suggestions. And that book is Breeding Organic Vegetables, a step-by-step guide for growers. And that is by Rowan White and Brian Connolly. And again, it's step by step, lots of charts and everything. And it makes it really easy at a glance to get a rather complex concept into your little brain for the day, because that's why I have books, is I can't keep it in my brain from one season to the next. So I pull out the book and refresh my memory each year. So it's really good to have those books. Another good seed saving book, though, is, of course, the infamous Susan Ashworth's Seed to Seed, which is probably the classic book. I have that one as well. But I have done my own plant breeding projects, and it's really fun. I mean, I don't want you to miss out on the fun. So it's very intimidating and daunting when you first contemplate it, but just do it. Just try it. What can you lose, right? It's just fun. So I had a hybrid variety of tomatoes that I saved seed from. And of course, the next generation, they were all over the board. And they were small, they were big, they were tasteless, they were wonderful. So I selected the wonderful ones. And after 6 years, I got a variety stable that was the size that I wanted and the flavor that I wanted. And I just was so proud of myself. It was just so much fun. So that's a simple idea. And then one year, a happy accident, as Carol Duppy would call it. There was a red Cracoviensis lettuce plant, and they are normally green with just red speckles. I didn't realize at first what it was. I just saw this red volunteer, like we were saying, growing in my garden where all the seeds were left from the year before. But I thought, that's got to be something intentional, not just a weed. So I put it in another spot and let it grow. And I realized, oh, that's a Cracoviensis, but it's solid red. So I saved seed from it. And for several years thereafter, I would get some green throwbacks, just like the original, but I would also get a small quantity of pure red, beautiful red, more like a Merlot plants. So sure enough, 5 or 6 years later, it was stable, and I had my own variety of red Cracoviensis. It's like, so anyway, I can't tell you how much fun it is.
Well, and another advantage to that is that you're creating varieties that are more adapted to your climate.
Exactly. And that's what you do by selecting. Exactly. And so a good case in point in that respect is garlic. I was lucky enough to inherit some garlic bulbs which are not really seeds, but that's what we use as the seeds, from a friend who had been growing the same variety for like 30 years. And so I had a head start because he's in our same climate, and I've been planting them alongside of other varieties that I have purchased elsewhere. No doubt about it. They're always the first to sprout. They grow the biggest and the darkest green. They're just so happy here. They have really, truly adapted to our climate. And that also is true of peppers and tomatoes. After 8 or 9 years, you will notice that they might hold out a little bit after that first frost, and they won't get killed until the second or third frost, which is, hey, in tomato land, that's a big deal. So.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about. We've had temperatures in the 30s already.
Yes, we have too. It was 38 this morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm in the opposite corner from you. I'm in Southwest Washington. So.
Oh, yeah. 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 Well, that's crazy for where you are, but for where we are, it's like a warning.
What is the most important thing to you about being a master gardener?
Well, sharing knowledge, and also making people feel comfortable to explore and experiment. There's no such thing as a mistake in gardening. You just learn from everything. And that's why I say same thing with plant breeding. It's like, well, let's just see what I can do. It's fun. So there's no such thing as a mistake. You simply learn by careful observation about what happened. It's like, well, what happened? And then you make notes in your little journal about what happened. And then you go, I wonder why that happened. Well, sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's not. And you got to observe from year to year. So you sharpen your observation skills. You're deeper connected to nature. And, that's the kind of joy and passion that I try to share with other people, because I want people to start gardening. It's good for health. It's good for the community. It gets you outside in the sun so that you're getting the nourishment from the sun that you need and the exercise that you need. I mean, what's not to like, right?
Any final thoughts about seed saving?
No, that was pretty much it right there. It's just, there's no such thing as a mistake. Just go for it and try, just start.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me today. This was great. I hope people learn how to save their seeds, and I'd love to hear from our listeners if you tried it and how it worked for you. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Evergreen Thumb, brought to you by the WSU Extension Master Gardener Program volunteers and sponsored by the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State. We hope that today's discussion has inspired and equipped you with valuable insights to nurture your garden. The Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State is a nonprofit organization whose primary purpose is to provide unifying support and advocacy for WSU Extension Master Gardener programs throughout Washington State. To support the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State, visit www.mastergardenerfoundation.org/donate. Whether you're an experienced master gardener or just starting out, the WSU Extension Master Gardener Program is here to support you every step of the way. WSU Extension Master Gardeners empower and sustain diverse communities with relevant, unbiased, research-based horticulture education. Reach out to your local WSU Extension office to connect with master gardeners and tap into a wealth of resources that can help you achieve gardening success. To learn more about the program or how to become a master gardener, visit mastergardener.wsu.edu/get-involved. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay connected with us, be sure to subscribe to future episodes filled with expert tips, fascinating stories, and practical advice. Don't forget to leave a review and share it with fellow gardeners to spread the joy of gardening. Questions or comments to be addressed in future episodes can be sent to hello@theevergreenthumb.org. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by guests of this podcast are their own and do not imply endorsement by Washington State University or the Master Gardener Foundation of Washington State.